Fine. Well, afternoon, everybody, and a very big welcome to this webinar on maths anxiety in teachers. I appreciate that some people may have previously been at another one on maths anxiety, so it's going to be quite an afternoon, because the Maths Association, who've helped us with this, have also been focusing on this topic. The webinar is run by the Maths Anxiety Trust and the Learnus Learning Skills Foundation, with the support of National Numeracy, and with links to other organisations like the Mathematical Association. We've got a brilliant set of speakers for you. Let me introduce myself first, though. I'm Margaret Brown, and I'm the president of the Maths Anxiety Trust. The speakers we have are Tom Hunt from Derby, Andy Grady, who's a teacher in Derby, Faye Cosgrove, who's a primary teacher, and Peter Mather. And I shall introduce them at greater length just before they give their talks. We've decided to have just a few minutes for everybody, so we're not having long addresses in order to leave the second half hour for your questions and your points. I'm sorry that we've had to mute everybody, but you understand, I think, why. But it does mean that you've got the chat open, and we would be very happy if you add to the chat any questions at any time. So please use the chat, and then when we finish the talks, we'll turn to that and select some questions to put to the panel. So please use that as we go along. There's no need to wait until the end, just anything that occurs to you. Okay, well, without any more ado, I'm going to start off by asking Dr. Tom Hunt to start. And he is an associate professor at the University of Derby, and the lead of the Maths Anxiety Research Group there. He's also a member of the committee of the Maths Anxiety Trust. So thank you, Tom, and all over to you.
Thanks, Margaret. Hi, everyone. So in the few minutes I've got to speak, I think it's probably important to kind of just give an idea of what we know from at least the academic literature, given that this is something I am very much involved in. But kind of moving away just from this general kind of perspective on maths anxiety to more of a specific focus really on teachers as a population. I guess we know from a few decades really of research now that maths anxiety is prevalent. It's something that affects lots of people, kind of irrespective of, geography, level of education, age, and teachers are not exempt. There's plenty of evidence to suggest that teachers do experience maths anxiety to varying degrees. And this occurs in, as I say, different levels of education, different phases, and also across the world. And I suppose we can approach this from kind of multiple perspectives. We could look at it in terms of how it might impact general well-being of teachers. We can look at how maths anxiety might impact things like recruitment, retention, for instance. But we can also look at the potential impact of that maths anxiety in teachers more widely. So the potential impact on pupils, for example. So their level of maths anxiety and their own maths attainment. As I say, it's a growing area given this specific focus, but we do know a few things now from one or two studies that specifically target teachers. So we know things like, for example, that length of experience as a teacher is related to maths anxiety in teachers. We know that trainee teachers often report higher levels of maths anxiety than those who are qualified. And we know that level of maths qualification relates to maths anxiety level in teachers as well. And I think from the off, it's kind of important to make a bit of a subtle distinction between this broad maths anxiety, so anxiety about maths generally, and an anxiety that's maybe more specific to teaching, so what we might call maths teaching anxiety. So sometimes these things are used kind of interchangeably. but it's starting to become apparent that that subtle distinction is quite important. Of course, they are related, but they're actually quite, they are separable as well. We know that maths anxiety in teachers plus maths teaching anxiety is associated with confidence, math self-efficacy in teachers as well. And we know from some recent research that's obviously published from the work carried out by colleagues in Canada, which was the focal point of the Guardian article, that confidence plays a huge part, and also perceived confidence or perceived competence in teachers. So the study that was published in the Guardian essentially showed that from big data looking across the world, that the strongest predictor of maths anxiety was just simply how competent students perceived their teachers to be. And those with less confidence in their teacher basically tended to feel more anxious. But they also found that the confidence reported by the teachers actually related to a lower maths anxiety by students. So the greater the confidence, the lower maths anxiety in the pupils. So there's that sort of potential inference there about the impact of maths anxiety in teachers, perceived confidence in maths, and that kind of impact on pupils. And generally speaking, from that study, they found that the level of maths anxiety in the classroom as a whole was related to an individual's maths achievement. So we've got lots of kind of things that are at play here, lots of things that might be kind of interlinked. So I think just to kind of finish off before passing over to Andy, what's important now is to think about how do we deal with some of these issues, and really, just like with any kind of anxiety, it's important to understand what maths anxiety means in teachers specifically. And as I say, this distinction between maths anxiety, maths teaching anxiety, and how that might impact some of the strategies that we adopt or adapt to tackle it. So that might be targeting mathematical knowledge, mathematical understanding, particularly in the early stages of teacher training, but also some of those more psychological strategies that focus on the anxiety itself. Okay, so we've got these kind of two broad approaches. I think roughly, these kind of activities like today are going to be really important, really just raising awareness of this specific issue, but also encouraging conversation around it and reducing some of the taboo, if you like, and enabling that support of teachers as well. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Andy Grady, who's head of maths at Paget High School in Burton-upon-Trent in Staffordshire.
Thanks, Tom. Hello all. Tom gets the science bit, I get the anecdote bit. Just a few stories really from me about the maths anxiety that I've come across in my career, and the plea really to help and support these people, or in certain cases examples of how we should challenge their anxiety. And I think the main thing from my point of view is to stop the fear and anxiety of maths in teachers spreading to the children. I'll give you the first example. A very popular head teacher that I worked for, the students looked up to him, very positive figure, and he was a good mathematician. But he did an assembly 3 weeks before their GCSEs, and he was doing this countdown. I don't know why teachers do this. They do the countdown to GCSEs, and he was doing the number of hours and minutes and seconds. And he finished off by saying, which according to my maths, which isn't very good. And I was like, oh no, that's just made my job a lot harder. And I had to challenge him and say, look, your anxiety, I think you were trying to be empathetic with the students, but you've made my job harder. And you've just told 350 year 11 students 3 weeks before their GCSEs that the person who they look up to is anxious about maths. And so we really need to be challenging these and saying, we've got to stop doing this. I think the second example is a fear of being made a fool by not knowing the answer. And this can happen to maths teachers themselves. I've been at the board where I may haven't prepared an A-level lesson, quite as rigorously as I should have done maybe. and I've suddenly frozen at the board, and there is this great fear of just turning round, and you can't just say every time, well, we'll cover this next week. And so there's that anxiety that can hit you at the chalk face, as it were. But I mean, are we supposed to know the answers to every question in every subject? I mean, I've had staff proudly tell me, and that, you know, this is true, that they've openly told their tutor group, and this is secondary students, don't come to me for help with maths. I'm useless at maths. And I have to help and support those people, but it's my job to be the maths anxiety police and challenge those people and say, look, you cannot say that. There's another example is hiding behind a fixed view of maths. I've heard the phrase, well, you either get maths or you don't. And, you know, when growth mindset was all the rage, and maybe it still is, that just is really the wrong message given to students who are being anxious. And it's about the teacher hiding behind that and hiding their anxiety. Another example was overemphasizing the struggles with maths. Whilst it's good to show that struggling with something can deepen the learning experience, it can be the flippant way that people mention it. So, for example, I came across a teaching assistant, and she was actually employed to do extra support in maths. And she was basically saying, well, I just struggle with maths. I find it really hard. And it was the flippant way. And again, I had to challenge her and say, you're belittling the subject in the eyes of the children and spreading that anxiety. And that's what, yeah. A couple of others. This is parents, I would say, rather from teachers. But I have heard it said by teachers, anxiety about maths being modern. Oh, the thing is about modern maths is they teach it so weirdly these days. Well, I don't think that's true. We tend to teach it more for understanding days over learning. And I think people have their anxiety behind this fear, well, it's modern maths, I don't get it. So all these types need challenging, you know, and maybe explaining that you can't pass on this anxiety to the children, and we need to help or support them. Final one was, I got an email just today when I was saying, look, does any teachers out there that we currently employ have maths anxiety? And one brave teacher came forward. She thought about being a primary school teacher. I work in a secondary school, but she was put off because of having to teach maths every day. I recently took GCSE biology and had to have help from my daughter. Luckily, I don't need to teach much maths. And I said, well, why the anxiety? And she said, I've always found it difficult. And when I have to do anything other than basic tasks, I start to panic and think I'm going to get it wrong and be embarrassed. And again, as a maths teacher, I've been there when I've been at the board and I've suddenly thought, I'm not quite sure about this. And I've got to sort of draw back. This person, she actually got a grade C at GCSE. So she's got a grade C at GCSE. And she's saying she didn't want to be a primary school teacher because she did think her maths was strong enough. So we've got to say to people, you know, it's not rocket science. You need a certain level of ability at maths, but please don't spread it to the children. And that's the angle that I'm coming from. Okay, so I think it's over to Margaret.
Thank you very much, Andy. That's been really useful to have a kind of classroom view. So what we're trying to do is to move between the sort of research and the classroom. And now we're going to Faye, Faye Cosgrove, who combines the two. Faye is an expert primary school teacher who also has a master's degree and is studying for a PhD and has been working in this area. So over to you, Faye.
Hello, thank you. I'm just going to organise my windows so that I can share my screen with you. Hopefully you can see a title now. This is the title of a blog that I wrote following this piece of research. And I've been generously given about 10 minutes to talk to you today. So this was a small scale piece of research based at the primary school where I teach. We're a large inner city primary school, and it took place over about 4 months of the academic year. We began with 4 teacher participants who made 2 nice, neat, reflective pairs, but one dropped out quite early on, so I actually took part as a reflective partner of one of the participants. Of those 3 participants, 2 appeared to have quite significant maths anxiety at the start. And interestingly, they were quite open with me about how they felt about maths. You know, hearing the comments that have already been said today about not being too open about your thoughts on maths, particularly in front of pupils, but actually being open with each other as staff, we have found quite beneficial. So briefly, the teachers recorded themselves teaching either a plenary or an introduction to a lesson, so a short teaching episode. And they selected critical incidents within that recording so that they were able to determine what they wanted to reflect on. We used a framework that was specific to maths, and very generously the author of that framework came to visit us. Tim Rowland, who wrote the Knowledge Quartet, which I'll tell you about shortly, came to introduce the framework to all of us so that we all had it straight from the horse's mouth, which was fantastic. And then I supplied everybody with a handbook and a performer to help them to record their notes as they were making their reflections and as they met with their partner to discuss. So briefly, let me outline the problem as I saw it, what took us to that point. Given that maths anxiety can lead to maths avoidance, but that number is so important in our society, anyone who is maths averse is disadvantaged. If we combine that with the fact that girls often report more maths anxiety than boys, but that maths graduates are also quite well paid, especially at the beginning of their careers, potentially maths anxiety is contributing to the STEM gender pay gap. And yet, efforts to increase STEM engagement sometimes overlook the role of attitudes, of teachers' attitudes and pupil attitudes to maths, including maths anxiety, and so perhaps fall short. And teacher maths anxiety really matters, as has already been said. Here's one particular paper with quite a large sample, and they found that they're finding strength in the support for the hypothesis that teacher maths anxiety is one of the factors that undermines children's learning. They found a negative relationship between teacher maths anxiety and student math achievement, both for boys and girls, even after they'd controlled for maths ability at the start of the year and for the teacher's maths ability too. So if you can reduce teacher maths anxiety, then pupil maths anxiety might be reduced too. And that would lead to improved achievement in maths. It might lead to greater engagement with STEM, potentially opening up better paid job opportunities for some people. And as Tom said near the beginning, that this would have an effect on both teacher and pupil well-being and on teacher retention, reducing stress for everybody. So I looked for a professional development opportunity, but I was aware that some of these programs are criticised for being too passive. When it's something that is done to you as a teacher, when it's a case of sit and listen, and in a few weeks from now, we'll come and scrutinise whether you're doing this or not, it's less effective in achieving its goals than when you're engaged, when this is something that you're doing for yourself and for each other. And reflective practice has become a central plank in the development process of a teacher's professional growth. So we use the Knowledge Quartet. You can see these 4 yellow ovals are the 4 dimensions of the framework. Foundation is the teacher's knowledge and beliefs about maths and about maths pedagogy, whether or not they're being put to use. Transformation is the ability of a teacher to allow someone else to know what they know. Connection is as it sounds, and it also includes sequencing, learning, and anticipating complexity and misconceptions. And contingency is the teacher's ability to think on their feet and to capitalize on unexpected developments. Perhaps children say something that they weren't expecting. So the 3 participants completed measures pre and post intervention. Quantitative measures were a maths anxiety scale by Hopko et al. And I used a general teaching efficacy scale and a specific one for maths. So teaching efficacy is your perception of how effective you are. So as a teacher in general, and then separately as a teacher of maths specifically. Also, I asked them to draw themselves doing maths and to talk to me about their drawing and what their drawing meant, to narrate what they were doing. And I asked probing questions, and we recorded that both at the beginning and the end. And we conducted semi-structured interviews beginning and end as well. And of course, I had their teaching episode recordings. We recorded the joint reflection discussions, and I asked them for copies of their notes too. So the intervention itself then, I asked the teachers to, as I said, record themselves teaching a short episode, to watch that recording themselves on their own and identify the critical incidents. It could be something they thought this was a strength of my teaching, could be this is an opportunity, I think, for development in my teaching. And they connected each of those to one of the codes within the knowledge quartet and made a note of the time, so that when they met with their partner, they were able to go straight to the, rather than spend time watching the whole thing, they were able to go straight to the critical incidents and to discuss those with their partners. And they added to their notes or augmented or adjusted their notes in that discussion. So they did that. They repeated those steps 1 to 3 until they had completed 4 cycles. Examples of things that were reflected on, for example, BIDMAS and BODMAS came up in a year 5 lesson. And they talked about BODMAS, and one of the pupils knew that O stood for order. But there was a problem in the lesson where nobody was quite on firm ground. And so order was interpreted as meaning order of operations. And of course, BIDMAS, BODMAS are there to help you remember the order of operations. But that's not what the O means. O stands for orders, but it's about order of magnitude of the numbers, or you can also call them powers or indices. The I in BIDMAS is indices. So we had a whole conversation about that, where the teacher was able to say, oh, I wasn't on firm ground there. I needed to check that. That's something I'm going to have to go back to. We're going to have to get firm about what that actually means. In a year 2 lesson, they reflected about parity, the oddness or evenness of a number. And the children were giving responses, and the teacher was valuing responses based on division as grouping and not valuing answers that were based on division as sharing. And rather than capitalizing on both opportunities, because he was expecting one thing, that's the thing he was valuing, and somewhat dismissing the other things, even though they could have made for a richer conversation. And one final example, the confusion with the US and the UK definitions of trapezium and trapezoid. It doesn't help that the Americans use those 2 words exactly opposite to the way we do. In the UK, trapezium is a 4-sided polygon with exactly 1 pair of parallel sides. And here, a trapezoid has no parallel sides. It's the inverse over there. So a pupil had, the teacher had been saying trapezium correctly. A child had said trapezoid, and the teacher, wanting to show that she was listening to the children and taking on board their views, started using that word as though they were synonyms. So again, we were able to say, oh, okay, what was the weak ground here? Oh, right, now I've looked it up. Now I'm firm, I can fix that now. So those are the sorts of things that they were able to discuss. Those discussions happened in pairs, and people were remarkably honest with each other. You know, we all worked together in one school, and people were remarkably honest and put their hands up and said, I think that could have been better. Or, I think this was really good. What do you think? So, the participant who had the lowest maths anxiety at the start didn't show a lot of change. According to the scale, she actually scored 2 points more by the end of the intervention. So we could say, oh no, we gave her some more maths anxiety, but actually looking at her teaching efficacy scores, which increased by very small amounts, and listening to what she said in her exit interview and her drawings, she didn't feel any more anxious. I think it was a quirk of the scale or of the day. You know, a small scale findings like that are hard to be sure about the interpretation, but it seems that the triangulation of data says she enjoyed the project. It didn't actually change her attitudes to maths all that much. However, participants 2 and 3, it does appear to have had an impact, particularly participant 2, whose maths anxiety decreased by 38% from 16 points to 10 points on that scale, and at the same time showed a good chunk of increase in teaching efficacy, 21 and 28% increase. And again, her comments when she was drawing herself doing maths, I'll give you an example in a minute, were quite marked. Participant 3 then also showed some improvements, maybe not quite as much as participant 2, but still worthwhile given how much, the small amount of time that it actually took us. In fact, here's participant 2's drawings before and after the intervention. Before, comments were along the lines of, help, I need to write it down. Or, I hate long division, absolutely with a passion, it really frightens me. So that's how honest people were being, which was brilliant. But it was also, the depth of feeling about maths was quite marked as well. By the end then, the same person was saying, well, being videoed made me feel anxious. It made me think, oh my gosh, what might you pick up from my lesson? Before I came in thinking I'd pick these things out and these things are okay, but I don't know if you'll pick the same things and maybe there's going to be a lot of opportunities. But we often picked almost identical sections of the lesson. And I came away thinking, oh, I do actually know what I'm talking about. After every lesson we looked at, I felt relieved. I think it was a good experience to look at myself on video. I learned an awful lot about myself and how I teach. Here's participants 3's drawings before, saying things like, I'm feeling worried, the answer's not quite right. Sometimes I don't know quite the best method to answer a problem. And then afterwards, he's drawn himself as a facilitator. Generally, I felt quite confident, he said. I wasn't worried about what questions would come, and I was never uncomfortable, and commented, this is like therapy. I think talking to me in the interview had been a bit like therapy, opening up about how he felt. And he said, my feelings about maths haven't changed that much, but my feelings about how I teach it have changed since I've been reflecting on it a lot more. I'm much more aware of how I say things. So, in summary, a small-scale research project based in one primary school over 4 months. Teachers recorded only 4 teaching episodes and identified their own critical incidents, the things that they wanted to reflect on, tied to the knowledge quartet to focus them on math-specific elements of their teaching. And of the 3 participants, 2 seemed to have significant maths anxiety at the start, and both showed some improvements by the end. So if we can reduce teacher maths anxiety, it's likely to reduce maths anxiety for pupils and therefore improve pupil attainment in maths. It should improve well-being for everybody and hopefully increase engagement with STEM as well. And this, I said in the conclusion to what I wrote, that more research is needed to determine when, how, and for whom such an approach might be effective. But it seems possible to reduce teacher maths anxiety using relatively modest but carefully designed interventions. I've included some of the references that I've used there for you. And if you want to read more, I wrote in the proceedings of a conference, and there's the blog post that I mentioned earlier too. Thank you. I've gone a little over my time. I apologise, but thank you for listening. And I'll hand back to Margaret.
Okay, thank you very much, Faye. I think it's very useful to see some research that is, strongly based in the classroom and shows that we can actually improve the situation. Right, okay, finally, I'm going to hand over to Peter Mather, who is Head of Training and Staff Development at Greenford High School in Ealing. Peter, any comments again from your background?
Hello, everyone. In terms of our maths department, there's often much discussion around maths anxiety for our students. However, in terms of teachers' maths anxiety, this is something that I hope our training programs mitigate quite well. Our school is a mixed, very large secondary school on the edge of West London, as you said, in Greenford. We've got nearly 2,000 pupils, and our maths department consists of 18 teachers. We have a head of department and we have 5 others with teaching and learning responsibilities. So that means there's much support between colleagues within the maths department. To give you some examples of how we hope that teachers' maths anxiety is addressed, our newest teachers, now called early career teachers, start with us in July, just after completing their PGCE or school-based training programs. And this gives them a few weeks, I think, as one of the previous speakers said, to build their confidence within our maths curriculum, the lessons that they're going to be teaching, and also in meeting the pupils before they start teaching in the autumn term. And also, it's more importantly a time for them to meet their subject mentors and discuss with them what they're going to be teaching in September, but also this is a person that's going to mentor them for the next 2 years of their teaching. Again, as I said, building confidence levels for the start of the year. Where possible with timetabling, we also try and give our newest teachers 1 or 2 lessons a week where they team teach with an experienced colleague. And I think that's some of the best type of training in terms of having that dialogue between what's going on a weekly basis. Other forms of support that we encourage and have in school is that we have mentors. For example, we have some of our gap year students who've left our A-level courses and they stay on to mentor within the maths department. We also use the National Tutoring Programme. And these themselves often become interested in teaching maths, and hopefully such an experience for them reduces their own maths anxiety before they even start training. We also have teaching assistants and lead practitioners, and they not only support our newest teachers through observations and feedback, but they, particularly the latter, our lead practitioners, can offer training to mentors, for example, in instructional coaching to help with our newest teachers. We're also a long-term partner school with Teach First. We currently have 2 who started with us last September, and sometimes their maths anxiety may be slightly greater coming in to teach for the very first time in September, whereas they didn't have the couple of weeks in July to get to know the school as well. But the best thing about working with Teach First, I think, is that them and their mentors work with departments in universities. So we have subject specialists visiting from UCL, IUE, and also Bath Spa University this year to help develop them as successful maths teachers. I also liked what Faye was saying about the video assisted reflection in terms of reducing teacher maths anxiety. And as a school, we've always advocated the use of recording lessons. I used to have a very old camcorder that we'd leave at the back of the classroom for teachers to record their own lessons and then to reflect on their own teaching. But now Teach First are using, I suppose, a modern state-of-the-art video recorder that can be accessed online, so we can watch lessons in different rooms in real time, or we can look at discussion later for particular aspects of a teacher's practice, as Faye said she did with her research. And I think the feedback given after observing teachers can only be enhanced with the actual recording being used as part of that dialogue. I also wanted to just say a little bit about our more experienced maths teachers. We do our best in school to fund external courses and maths conferences. For example, the head of department recently went on a Excellence in Maths conference at the University of Warwick. And these are fed back to the maths department as a regular item on their weekly department meeting schedule. And also, for almost 10 years, we've also encouraged maths teachers to go on it's called Teaching A-Level Mathematics, or TAM. This is a sustained professional development course, and it's been designed to support teachers of GCSE maths who wish to teach A-Level for the first time. And the course takes place over 6 days during the year. There is a cost, but this is then reimbursed once teachers complete the course. And you also get an additional amount which could cover the cost of supply teachers. And we've always tried to have 2 teachers do this together so they can support each other throughout the course. And that's been very well received in terms of building up their confidence for A-level maths teaching. I hope this has given you a few examples of how we use professional development and training here at Greenford to help reduce maths anxiety faced by our teachers. And I'll hand you back over to Margaret. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. I'm also aware that we have some experts in the audience, and so please don't feel shy about talking about any research or any of your own experiences. So, please feel free to do that. I'm still waiting, I think, for some points and questions, but we have got some that have been submitted before. So I'm going to start by asking one or two of the points that have come up. And I'm going to start by asking Tom in particular about what we know about the levels of mathematical competence and confidence of teachers in relation to the age range of children they teach and in relation to gender. So do we know anything about, I suppose this is really asking about primary and secondary teachers, about any differences there? And also, do we know anything about gender? And I think you could answer that in relation to maths anxiety in general, as well as to teachers.
Yeah, that's right. In terms of the kind of competence issue, if you like, that, I mean, that's a really tricky one to answer, I guess, because it depends what the benchmarks are. What is it we're sort of assessing against, if you like. I mean, like I say, what we do know from the little research that there is out there is that certainly maths qualification is related to levels of maths anxiety in teachers. So as you might guess, the higher the level of qualification, the lower the self-reported level of maths anxiety. I mean, you could also argue that kind of irrespective of qualification level, it's that perceived competence as well that's important, and this is obviously what shone through in terms of that important study that came out recently from Canada, that it is that perceived confidence amongst teachers that's related to anxiety, but it's also whether the pupils perceive their teacher as competent as well. So that could be different from actual levels of competence, if you like. So we know that anxiety, maths anxiety, gets in the way of it kind of masks one's true ability, if you like. So you might have that ability there, you might have that competence, but the anxiety just disrupts it. So if you are, if you like, coming across as not being particularly competent, then that might be more damaging in a way than any actual competence, or at least it might be important. So I think we need to certainly separate those things a little bit. So what was the other part of the
other
question?
one was about gender.
Gender, yeah. So I think if you look very broadly across the maths anxiety literature, there's certainly a trend that women, girls will report higher levels of maths anxiety. It's often the case that it's not huge amounts in terms of the difference, but there's certainly a trend there. When you look at maths anxiety in teachers, I have to say the difference is less pronounced. Often there's no difference there at all when it comes to gender. So we're talking about gender differences more within the general population, within the general student population, not necessarily within teachers. I think to some extent that can be explained by often an imbalance in the number of men versus women who take part in surveys, for example. So particularly at primary school level. So there's an imbalance often there in terms of a greater number of female teachers. So it's sometimes very difficult to sort of tease out whether there actually is a difference between men and women. But as I say, the small amount of research out there does suggest that there's less of a difference, if any, when we look at teachers compared to the general population.
Okay, thanks, Tom. I'm going to go on to the next question, but if anybody on the panel or any of the speakers wants to say anything, do put your hand up now, kind of add your contribution. But I'm now going to, following one of the questions on the chat, come back to Peter. And somebody says, this is a wonderful example in a high school. How does this translate to a mixed age class in primary or early years? So can primary schools do something, not obviously on the same scale as a large secondary school, but have you any thoughts about how you might translate that for a primary school, Peter?
I think the first thing I would say is to maybe get in touch with local schools, see if you can actually visit some of those schools. We definitely have primary colleagues come to see us, as we do with some of our colleagues going into primary schools, where we can share resources and training events. I wonder also, our local authority, Ealing, has a support program for maths teachers, because there are several smaller primary schools where they get together. So I wonder if it's worth getting in touch with your local authority and seeing if they have any subject network groups or other things that can offer support. But I would definitely get in touch with local schools and see what they're doing and get involved with perhaps some of their maths departments, and they could offer some of their support and training.
Thank you. Anybody else want to come in on that? I think I'll ask Faye, because I know Faye is not just a researcher and a primary teacher, but has a lot of functions in terms of professional development as well. And you've told us how, ways forward, but any more sort of things that you think a primary school might be able to do, particularly a very small one?
I think most primary schools have good practitioners, and sometimes there isn't the opportunity to spread that practice around the school. If it is a very small primary, then perhaps to lean on your cluster. I'm in Wales here, so I beg your pardon if the English terminology is different and you don't call them clusters, but I'm sure that you work together as primary schools. So to lean on the good practice and the confident practitioners who are there. I think I'm absolutely for us being more open and being in each other's classrooms. I think most teachers welcome it, to work with other teachers, particularly maybe you teach the same year group but in a different school, or I know you mentioned that it's a mixed age context, to pair up with someone else who's teaching at a mixed age context. Particularly if they're feeling confident. It may be that they feel confident and they can share their practice in maths, and you feel confident in something else. Here it would be in Welsh language teaching probably, and so there could be some reciprocal arrangement which benefits everybody, rather than costing time, in an uneven way. Find out who the confident and good practitioners are. Ask your head teacher, ask other head teachers. Yeah, I mean, in the days when there were maths advisors, they knew who to put you in touch with. Yeah. It is a bit more difficult now.
Okay, and I think on the chat we've got the mention of maths hubs, which is obviously also an important in England, an important source. Somebody has mentioned, I'm going to come back to Andy, about there's this problem about, you can show empathy with children by saying, oh, I can't always get these right. And there's a point at which this becomes a sort of an expectation, I can't get these right, so you should expect not to get these right either. So, I mean, would you like to talk, Andy, for a little while about, the kind of difference between a teacher showing empathy with the students who are struggling and actually showing the evidence of their own maths anxiety, if you like, and their low expectations of students?
Yeah, I think it's breaking it down step by step. I mean, usually any maths problem, you can probably break it down into 3, 4, 5 steps, and you've just got to break it down into each step rather than to generalize and say, this is going to be a struggle. And you can break it down to each step and say, well, maybe I struggled with this step, but not this step. It's just the way that some people say, I'm not very good at maths. And I take the point on the chat that just because you say you're not good at something, it doesn't mean you're anxious about it. But my whole thing is about spreading that anxiety to children. I mean, the maths department that I work with, they're all pretty good mathematicians. And so they don't really spread that anxiety to the children, but it worries me that other teachers do. One of the things that I do want to mention is that maybe this maths anxiety amongst children, I heard a speaker once, I can't remember who they were, but I think going back a few years, I think maths was on a par with every other subject. It wasn't put on a pedestal. It wasn't the most important subject. So maths and English have been put on a pedestal by having maths and English are now double weighted. Yeah. They are perceived to be more important than other subjects. Yeah. And so maybe teachers are more anxious about maths because it's perceived to be more important. You know, you can't get anywhere without a grade 4 or a grade 5 in maths, which again, you know, I will never say to a child, you know, you must have a grade 4 in maths and English. You know, it'll close a few doors, but it doesn't mean it's the end of the world. Some students will actually say to me, if I don't get a grade 4 in maths, will I get a job? You know, and it's this anxiety about, you know, maths is so important, and I'm thinking, well, it's not that important.
Okay, thank you. Can I just pick up the point we've got in the chat from Fatima? And Fatima says she's very confident in maths, but gets anxious wondering if the learners will understand the content. And I think we've got an answer from Tom. Tom, would you like to sort of say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So we conducted a study 2 or 3 years ago with a number of primary school teachers in the UK, including trainee teachers, and we attempted to basically validate. It was a Turkish scale at the time, a self-report measure of maths teaching anxiety, and we translated it into English. And we looked at a few different things in terms of, like I mentioned before, gender differences or correlations with length of experience, things like that. But one thing we did was to sort of factor analyze the scores on the scale to see whether we're talking about a kind of a single construct, if you like, this idea of maths teaching anxiety, or could it be separated in some way? And what we found is that there were certain items on that scale that related very specifically to anxiety about your own competency. So I feel worried, I feel anxious about, you know, my ability to teach maths, essentially, versus other items that related to a separate construct that was all about anxiety and worry to do with whether the children in your class would understand mathematical concepts, whether they would do well enough in terms of assessments and meeting objectives and things like that. So it's interesting that Fatima raised that point, because that's something that we observed, that sort of separation of maths teaching anxiety into those two distinct types. I think one of the questions to some extent that remains, I think Faye might have touched upon this to some extent in terms of kind of more general teaching self-efficacy, is how you then separate out some of that anxiety according to maths compared to everything else, in terms of general anxiety, in terms of teaching other specific subjects, and also kind of a more general anxiety about teaching, if you like. But I think, yeah, it's an interesting point that we're often not talking about just a straightforward thing. You know, we've got this general concept of maths anxiety. We've then got this kind of very specific math teaching anxiety, but even that in itself you can then split up in terms of, okay, what's contributing to that, and in many cases it might be that you don't have much anxiety necessarily about your own abilities even, but that anxiety might be driven by other pressures, potentially other external pressures that might relate to, you know, whether your own pupils, like I say, meet objectives, do well in assessments, you know, whatever that might mean.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to also raise, I think is it Gitter or Jitter, this point about that some teachers, perhaps in other countries, but I'm sure here too, are very reluctant to be observed or to admit to any problems, or specifically about their own anxiety about maths. And how can you, how might you start a conversation with such teachers? How is it possible to, you know, is it possible to begin that, to make people more relaxed about talking about it? Faye, would you like to say anything about that? You know, how did you have any problems with teachers, you know, not wanting to discuss openly with you their own anxieties? And if you did, how might you address it?
Yeah, thank you. Like I mentioned, I was surprised at how willing staff in my school were to talk to me about how they felt. I'm the maths coordinator for the school, and I mean, power relationships in a primary school are quite muddled. It's hard to really know exactly who's in charge, but one might be able to say that in terms of maths, I'm in charge. And in terms of maths, I might even be thought of as their line manager. And yet they were willing to tell me, oh, this is how I feel. And one person recounted how they felt on their PGCE about feeling sick every morning going in. Teaching the other subjects, he was quite happy, but it was just the fact that maths was there every day. So, I mean, if in a different context where people weren't so willing to talk, I would want to ask why. Not necessarily ask them why, but try to think about what you know about the school, what you know about the leadership and the culture at that school. Can you identify, maybe it's just one particular person that people feel uptight in front of, and so you can change the context and people might open up. Is it that just they don't know you very well and there are opportunities to get to know them better and to be able to do things in casual ways? Do you have an opportunity, for instance, to do some training, to open a conversation by delivering some training about maths anxiety in general? And as part of that, you mentioned that teachers who feel anxious about maths may be having this effect on their pupils, and just sort of open the conversation that way and see what comes. I think there are probably doors that you can push, obviously not knowing exactly what your context is. It's hard to be sure exactly what to do, but I would think one of those avenues might have some potential.
We've got I just draw your attention to the fact that Sue has given us a long list on the chat of different ways that you can begin to talk about this with and different ways it could show up in the classroom, I think. So I don't know whether could we perhaps open the Sue's muting to ask. I'm not sure whether our controllers can do that, but to say a little bit about that. Is Sue Skirm, I think, scribe? I'm not sure whether that's possible. While we're doing that, I'm going to ask another question that we were sent in beforehand, which was about whether maths anxiety affects differently different aspects of maths. Is it always about number work? I mean, we've had a very clear demonstration, I think, example from Faye about long division, which is certainly a hang-up a number of people have. But are there some aspects of maths which you think lead to more anxiety than others? Tom, would you like to have a go at that one?
Yeah, so I think over the years now there has been a move away from this idea of, you know, maths anxiety just being a unitary kind of thing. I think over the years, different studies have found that it's likely to be a multi-dimensional construct, and the typical things that come out, I think, are number work. So anxiety around numbers more generally, that often includes mental arithmetic, but often anxiety around being evaluated specifically in maths as well. So not just general test anxiety. I have to say that whilst there's that relationship with test anxiety, maths test anxiety, if you like, is definitely separable from that more general test anxiety. So certainly in terms of the sort of core features of maths anxiety, you've got that evaluative element to it, but also the kind of number-based element. And we did a bit of work recently to kind of unpack what we mean by number work. So is it that, for example, you might be more anxious about algebra, you know, or geometry or space and shape, and that kind of thing? And that's still a little bit unclear. So there was some evidence to suggest that anxiety can really differ between those different types. I think anecdotally, lots of students really struggle when it comes to algebra. That's like I've just seen in the chat. Algebra, the more abstract maths, maybe is something that people do often fear. And again, there's been work in the past that has kind of hinted at that. And I think part of the issue is in measurement. You know, when we talk about how do we know whether people are maths anxious or what is it they're anxious about, we often rely on quantitative self-report measures, and you know, the answers that you get from those are going to be contingent upon what the actual items are, what the statements are. So you know, those statements tend to be around how anxious would you feel, doing a particular math task, and that's often, the more kind of mental arithmetic based maths, number work and multiplication, addition and things like that, as well as different scenarios involving maths where that math maybe isn't specified, but it's the situation that might drive that anxiety.
Just quickly, we're getting towards the end, Tom, so if I can cut you off and just go to Andy, who points out that just the word algebra can cause anxiety. That's that seems to be a particular example. We've now got Sue Skirm unmuted. So Sue, if we can come to you, would you like to say something about what you added on the chat?
Well, mine will be very brief, Margaret. I just read Fatima's question as what you should look for in students in the classroom, and therefore how to initiate that conversation with teachers. And when pupils feel anxious, particularly from my experience in a primary school classroom, it's not always apparent in the maths itself that they're completing, because sometimes they can be anxious and they're getting the answer right. Sometimes they can be anxious and they're getting the answer wrong. So it's not just a question of assessing the children's ability, and it can reflect in this very simple list of behaviours that are often misinterpreted as misbehaviour without looking at the actual the cause of the symptom, as it were. And that can initiate conversations with teachers about why the pupils are behaving like that in the maths lesson, and open up that whole conversation about anxiety.
Okay, thank you. We've got a very quick question. I think somebody asked about which grade level they should start at in an international school that goes from 5 up to 16. Where might you start your interventions? I'm going to ask Tom again. Just one quick answer to that, Tom.
Yeah, I think from a practical point of view, year 2 upwards. I think reception year 1, it's often very challenging, but year 2 upwards, I would start.
Lovely, thank you very much. And I think what's sad is there's obviously so much more to say about this subject. And I know there are lots of, experts who are in the audience who could add as well. So I think it just shows what a lot of interest there is. I'd like to finish by thanking, first of all our speakers, Tom and Andy and Faye and Peter, but also thanking Caroline and Peter Schopp for organising this and managing the techniques as well. So then thank you for all the people who've contributed on chat. And I want to just draw your attention to the fact that we will be continuing this in the autumn with some other seminars, because as I say, there's obviously lots more to be said about this. So thank you very much for your participation, everybody. And we will continue with this topic in the future. Thanks very much. Bye.